Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Ask Lattice. I think we're about 10 episodes in, so we're starting to get into a good rhythm of this, and we're getting loads of interesting questions. So we've got another 4 or 5 to answer today, and hopefully we'll get to them as best as we can.
Okay, so question 1 is a little controversial. It's simple, but controversial.
I don't actually know most of these questions before he asks as well, so if I look a bit surprised, it is genuine.
Who is the most famous climber that you've trained?
That I've trained or tested?
I guess it could be both, because I'm not sure how specific the person has been on this.
So I think in terms of working with famous climbers, as it were, in terms of those that are competing in the World Cups and on films, we're relatively open that we've worked with some pretty cool people, sort of testing Alex Magos, training Ben Moon, and that's been really cool, particularly when you've kind of grown up looking at these people, particularly sort of Ben Moon, Steve McLaurin, always putting them on quite high on a pedestal and always looking up to them as climbers, so that's been really cool. I'd say one thing though, we're always trying to be really strict with training and sort of telling people who we work with, because it's quite a personal relationship between the coach and a client. So I think our policy is generally not to say who we work with. That's probably fair to say?
Yeah, we try and take, so there's a number of really quite high profile climbers that we have worked with or are working with, who we don't really publicly mention or talk about their names, because we've always taken the approach that it's up for that person to say to us explicitly, yeah, we'd like to promote how we're working with you, the kind of training work we're doing, what session content you might do. And there's kind of basically an agreement between us of how that works, because it's sometimes a little bit of a sensitive subject, and it's something that we'll always respect as a coaching company. And I understand myself as a professional athlete that sometimes you don't always want to say that you're getting assistance or training with someone else, if you just want to keep it underground and just concentrate on the performance element of your climbing.
And I don't think I could think of anything worse than being plugged by or associated with a famous climber when they don't believe in what we're doing either. I think our results have got to speak for themselves, and hopefully we'll continue to keep up that mentality.
Yeah, good question though. I like that one. Okay, so next question is from Craig Ferber, and he's asked about cardio, so specifically things like running and cycling. And he's asked, can I ride and run lots of miles whilst also training? And this is someone who's on a Lattice Light plan at the moment, and he's asked, how can he use this within his training plan if he's doing lots of mileage? Is it okay?
So firstly, yes, it's always okay. Does it affect your training is a slightly different question. For me personally, I think it comes down to what are your motivations and what do you enjoy doing? What do you want to spend your time doing? If you were a World Cup athlete or a full-time climber or had very, very specific goals, I would answer it very differently to, do you enjoy climbing? Are you doing it as part of your lifestyle? And are you wanting to ride and run as part of that same lifestyle? You can always do that mileage on top of your training, but there might have to be some compromises.
Yeah, it's basically a balance and it's a compromise. And I really enjoy my endurance sports outside of climbing, and I'm really keen on running. I've run for many, many years. But the amount of running that I do has really changed a lot over the years, because I've learned that if I do a lot of it and I'm really trying to push that element of my training as well as the climbing, then I do see a result of diminishing returns on the training that I put in, but also a loss of strength. And it's hard to say exactly why that happens, because there is research that says that if you do lower limb endurance sports but upper limb explosive training, then you shouldn't get some kind of conflict or conflict that goes on between the two. But in my experience, it's very hard to be an explosive power athlete as well as a very long endurance athlete. And in many senses, I think half of it comes down to what we see with our clients, where if they've only got 15 hours, 10 hours a week to put into quality training of any form, then it's really asking too much to do 10 hours of quality training work in climbing, but then do 10 hours of quality work on a bike or running. And it's just unrealistic. So the quality of the sessions goes down, and of course, the results go down.
I think the example I always use when working with athletes is through the training, your training is a message to your body, and the message is saying you need to change in this type of way. So what's the loudest and most frequent message that your body's receiving? If I'm fingerboarding 3 times a week, the amount of time spent fingerboarding is actually quite minimal. Say we do, around 8 sets at maximum, 10 seconds each. You're looking at 80 seconds 3 times a week. If I go running 3 times a week as well, and I do around 10K each time, the amount of time running is also a much bigger time stimulus, and probably a louder message to my body saying you need to adapt to running. And I think trying to work out this messaging system to the body is one of the most easiest examples of how I always explain it. Also, it's kind of looking at what's your body more designed for. So like Tom was saying, he's always been into endurance sports and he adapts quite well to doing running. So he's always going to be quick to adapt to that. Vice versa, unfortunately, his fingers are not particularly strong. So it takes him a lot of effort to get stronger fingers. So if his body's constantly being told you need to be good at running, then his body's going to change to get better at running. He needs a lot of stimulus to get stronger fingers, so it needs to be a really loud message.
Yeah, that's exactly how it is for me, because I'm a particular type of climber that sits on one end of the spectrum, and we see that a lot with our clients as well, that particularly those endurance trained athletes who tend to be fitter, more economical and weaker for the grade have to be very, very careful of that overemphasis on cardiovascular work within their training. And I have a broad rule that I tell a lot of clients that I work with, because I think people like sticking to rules, and I say to them that if you insist and you really want to do some kind of running or cycling on top of the climbing training that you're doing, then look at your training history in either of those cardiovascular sports and drop the weekly mileage that you do by at least 50%. So if historically you've been a 20 miles a week runner, if you want to do climbing training on top of your running, drop your weekly mileage down to 10 miles a week. So cut it in half, and I find that tends to be just about manageable.
And this may, another factor in this that might seem a little controversial to some, is running and cycling at a low intensity is definitely quite a good weight management tool. If you're struggling to manage weight by just nutrition alone, and you like to do that extra cardio stimulus to try and help that along, it's something I quite like doing. I think it is a good idea, but the same thing again, it doesn't have to be a huge amount of volume. And if you want to maximize cardio workouts purely for weight management, then try and do it before breakfast in a fasted state. That's going to really sort of put it to the next level in helping with weight management purely using cardio.
Okay, next question is from Matt Brown, and he's asked, how can you train for very specific moves? And the example that he gave on the questions was, what happens if I'm trying to do a move in my project and I'm locking down with one side and I'm coming up short on that hold by 2 centimeters, for example, or that my foot's popping off. So it's one very particular move on a project. How do we deal with that in a training sense?
I absolutely love this sort of challenge when people come to us with this, because effectively it's going, what muscles are being used, what planes of movement are being used, and what forces are being used. So you're looking at what positions are you going to be in. Easiest way to work that out is go and video yourself or get a friend to video you doing it. So in this example, whether Tom was mimicking it on purpose or not, we're going for sort of a Gaston movement, pushing against another foot, if that's our example. In that example, if I get it filmed, I can see what movements are being used, and through doing that, I can work out what muscles are being used. If you're unsure about sort of how muscles work, then it's always good to ask someone who might know, like a coach, and they'll help you explain which muscles are in use.
Yeah, another element to kind of add on to this in terms of getting outside help and a coach or a really good, knowledgeable, experienced friend can be invaluable in this scenario is to have a go at building yourself some kind of replica or a few versions of a replica of your problem move. So if I was to do it, I would take my shoulder move and my long lock off and a small foothold, and I would build 3 versions of this move. And I'd start to play around with small handhold, long move, small handhold, shorter move, but really bad foothold. And I'd start to work out what was my true limiting factor on this particular move. And it's a really good sort of self-analytical exercise to do when you're trying to work out what is that limiting factor. And I've seen a lot of Sheffield climbers who are really good at replica building, build multiple versions of a replica so that they get good at working out what is it that makes a difference on that particular move.
There's a really good video actually of Neil Gresham online where he's working a project, I think it was at Kilnsley, and he's got a particular move in the middle where he's doing a really big span, and that's a really good example of showing the process that he's done. He's done conditioning for that movement, and he's done it on the board and off the board. And I think it's a really nice explanation, and that sort of process has been used for years and years and years, whether it was sort of Gaskins or Malcolm Smith on Hubble, or looking more recently at people like Alex Barrows that are training for Eravea. There's always been a replica involved, and there's always been conditioning designed specifically around the muscles and movements involved in that specific move.
Sounds like a really good project though, and good luck with it. Do stick at it and think about those replicas. Okay, last question is from Jeff Sanders, and he has asked, I like this question actually, what's the best design for a home wall? We've both got home walls or have had them in the past.
Yeah, so this is actually a really good question for me. I'm just moving house at the moment, and to my partner's dismay, I'm spending more time planning my home wall, despite having this place, than I am talking about furniture or painting or anything else. So it's a really exciting question, but you can get a little bit bogged down if you're not too careful. And I think I'm slightly guilty of that right now.
So yeah, when you've got a lot of options and you're starting out with your blank canvas with your home design, I think the most effective way to do it is to deal with it from a specificity point of view. So finding something that you can build which is really specific to your discipline and what you want to achieve in your climbing, but also the variety element. So what I mean by that is that when you build your home training facility, there is going to be a point, no matter how obsessed you are with whatever style of climbing or project you're into, where you'll go, I just want to do other stuff. I don't want to just keep going on and trying these kind of moves or this angle of terrain that suits my project. You need variety in there to keep motivated. So for me, that was addressing the whole kind of crack climbing specific element of my climbing. So I'm really into crack climbing. And of course I have those jamming cracks, you've seen them in my cellar all over the place, but I've had completely different forms of climbing, like just standard steep boards. So I've got a 50-degree board and also a 30-degree board, plus a campus board. And that gives all the variety to stuff that I'm not totally obsessed by, but I really like to still have sessions on it and keep the stimulus mixed up. And
the list that Tom's just gone through might make you think that he's got a huge setup that's completely professionally built, and it's not something that you could do quite easily. It's not professionally built, it's not really safe, and everyone could build it at home as long as you've got one hammer and nail and a bit of wood. So the main thing is that you can make it work for you and go for a bit of variety. The other thing that I would probably say is you need to think about what you want to improve on as well. So for me, because I haven't got any particularly specific goals at the moment, it would be very easy for me in the current house that I'm going towards to build a really steep training board, like a systems type board. However, I already know that I'm quite good at small snatchy movements, and that's not an area I particularly need to work on compared to other parts of my climbing. I need to spend more time going upwards. So I might go for a slightly less steep board compared to what most people would have in their houses, but I'm looking for what's going to help me improve.
Yeah, one additional thing actually that I'd add to that is that, and I've seen a lot of people do this really effectively, is that there's certain training tools which are, with the best will in the world, not the most exciting and have a certain amount of monotony involved with them. And one of those is fingerboarding. It's there's not a great deal of movement involved. You're just hanging off a fingerboard, working really hard. And a really important or really key thing to addressing the monotony is to make sure that that training tool is extremely accessible and has a high convenience factor. So I've seen a lot of people shove their fingerboard, way up in the attic, and you have to get the loft ladder down and move boxes around to do a fingerboard session, or they've put it down at the end of their garden. In most cases, it doesn't work very well because it's already boring to do it, and so you'll quickly find excuses. Whereas if you mount your fingerboard in, say, your kitchen or your hallway going into the house, you'll pass it all the time, you'll see it a lot of the time, and it's really convenient to train on. And actually, in all honesty, stay reasonably, conversational and communicative with everyone in your house, so you can still hang out with everyone and train at the same time.
I'm just going to go through a couple of really practical tips as well, regardless of what you're building. So fingerboard, what I would always say is spend the time making the fixings good so that you can take the fingerboards on and off using back plates, but you're only ever changing a couple of screws so that you can change the setup quite easily without having to remove the whole thing. That made a big difference for me. The next thing, I'm not sure where Jeff is based, but if you're in quite a wet area, so here in the UK, it rains quite a lot. If it's going to be in the garden, you need to make sure it's a really good shelter, because there's nothing worse than starting to get rain on it all the time, or even just on the edge of the mats. And it's kind of that off-putting sort of nature. And if you're using wooden holds, it starts to get a bit minging after a while. So you need to make sure that you're thinking about the conditions you're going to be in. In the basement, make sure there's good ventilation. Something which is going to get rid of the moisture in the air, and a fan makes a massive difference to not only your health but your performance and the chalky environment. And then probably last but not least is holds can be quite expensive and they can be quite hard to make. If you're not into making holds and actually taking the time to do it, then it's better just to buy them and get them in and want to actually climb on them. If you're going to make holds, take your time and actually make something that you're really pleased with. There's nothing worse than setting a really good board and then having a load of holds that you don't actually enjoy climbing on. I've done that before. I know a lot of other people that have done, and they spend all this time not really using it until they end up forking out, spending a lot more money and actually getting the holds they want, and then they use it loads. Invest the time or money from the beginning and it'll pay dividends in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, that kind of ties things up there with the questions from the Facebook community group. I hope you've enjoyed them today. And as ever, keep following us on Facebook and Instagram, and you can feedback with further questions for more YouTube videos with the Q&A sessions. If you've enjoyed this video, please click the like and subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.